And he did not even remember having met her. And so, again, big change from book to movie because Elphaba is like, hello and thank you for joining me here at Why the Book Wins, where I compare books with their movie adaptations. My name is Laura, and today I am talking about Wicked Part 2, officially titled Wicked for Good, directed by John M. Chu, released in 2025. And it is a movie adaptation of the musical written by Stephen Schwartz and Winnie Holzman, which premiered in 2003. And the Broadway play is an adaptation of the book by Gregory Maguire, published in 1995, titled Wicked, The Life and Times of the Wicked Witch of the West. And so I wanted to mention, of course, the writers of the play, since the movie is the movie adaptation of the play. So the movie is not an adaptation of the book. It's a movie version of the play, and the play was an adaptation of the book, kind of, but it's very loosely based. But I've never seen the play. I still have not yet seen it. I have just read about the plot, and so it seems like the play is exactly like the movie, so there's not much comparison needed for that. So in this video, I compare the movie with the book. And I did a book versus movie for part 1 last year. And so yeah, now that part 2 is out, I'm here to complete my coverage for Wicked. And I wanted to say, since making that video last year, I have since seen Wicked Part 1 a second time. And I just want to say that that movie is perfect. Like, there is nothing I would change about it. Great performances, the music and musical numbers are fantastic, the dancing, the characters are so memorable, the pacing is incredible. So yeah, it's just absolutely perfect, and I just love it so much. And then also, I'm pretty sure I mentioned this in my previous video, but I also feel the need to clarify yet again that, like I said, I've never seen the play. And so a lot of people who dislike the book, they dislike it because they had seen the play, and so then they're curious about reading the book, and then when they read the book, they are shocked and disappointed to learn how different it is. And not only is it different, but the book is so dark and very adult, unlike the musical. And so that's why a lot of people dislike the book. So I feel like it's important to say that I did not go into the book last year with preconceived ideas on what I wanted it to be or what I thought it would be. I knew nothing about the musical. And so the reason I disliked the book in part was because it is very heavy in the fantasy genre, and I'm just not a big fantasy person. I don't enjoy world building and having to learn like magic systems and things. And so in that sense, it just isn't my preferred genre. But then also there is just so much going on, and I would take a character-driven story over a plot-driven story any day. And while this is, of course, a character study of Elphaba, there is also just so much happening, and it was kind of too much for me personally. Like in this video, there is so much to get into in what happens in the book because it's so chock full of events. But I also want to say that while last year, by the time I finished this book, it just felt so long, and so I was just so relieved to be done with it. Whereas this year, I went through starting once they leave the Emerald City, and I read/skimmed through it again. I'll be honest, I didn't thoroughly read it this time around, but I skimmed through the second half as a refresher. And the second time around, I was kind of into it, and I was liking it more, and I like the way the book ends. And so the dark aspect of the book isn't why I disliked it last year. It's just, it felt way too long. And so I think this year, starting at around halfway, maybe that helped me like it more. And so yeah, I was pleasantly surprised at how into it I was reading the second half this time around. And so it's not a book I would encourage people to read, but I also wouldn't discourage you from reading it either. I would just say, if you're reading this because you're a fan of the movie or the Broadway musical, just be aware how different it is. And again, it's pretty dark. It's very adult compared to the movie. And so I think if that's what you're wanting the book to be, then don't bother reading the book because you'll be disappointed. So if you love the movie, but you're also down to read a dark, twisted version of the story, then yeah, go ahead and check out the book. But yeah, it's kind of a tough one to recommend because I would have to know why you want to read it in order to know whether or not I would recommend it to you. And then as far as Wicked for Good goes, my quick spoiler-free thoughts, I thought the movie was great. And if you liked the first, definitely go see this one in theaters. The first one focuses more on Elphaba and her character arc, whereas here we focus more on Glinda as she contemplates who she has become and who she wants to be going forward. Because yeah, Elphaba is the one who experiences change in the first movie, whereas in the second movie, Elphaba kind of stays the same. I mean, you could argue that, but for the most part, she stays the same, and it's Glinda who experiences a change in part 2. And so, yeah, that was interesting, whereas the book is definitely just all about Elphaba. But with Wicked Part 1 and 2, I would also say that I personally prefer the music, both the songs themselves, but also the choreography of Part 1 better. But again, I still did really like the second one, and I would recommend it. I do think the more time that goes on, the more kind of disappointed I am, just because, again, the first one is just so perfect. It's incredible. And so I am a little sad that the second one didn't live up to the first. But yeah, anyway, I still liked it. And from here on out, I will now get into the details of the plot, which means there will be spoilers going forward. And so I will begin with the book plot. And like I've been saying, the book is so completely different and there is so much to get into. So yeah, I'm just going to give a quick rundown of what happens once they leave Emerald City. And even though this is all unique to the book, I will include images from the movie just to break up the video, so it's not just me looking at the camera. But yeah, let's just get right to it because there's a lot to cover. So Elphaba and Glinda part ways after the Emerald City, and Glinda returns to Shiz, but Elphaba stays in the city because she's disappointed about the wizard not caring about what is happening to the animals, and she never sees him in his true form. He presents himself to them as bones, and so she knows nothing about the wizard, just that he doesn't care about the animals. And so while Glinda goes on her way back to school, Elphaba stays put, and some years later, Fiyero happens upon her living there incognito basically, and she is part of an underground resistance group that wants to take down the wizard. And the two begin an affair because Fiyero is married. Remember, before even arriving at Shiz, he had gotten married as a child, and so they made it legal and official when they were children, but they didn't act as husband and wife until they came of age. And so now Fiyero is of age, and he is married to this woman, and they have kids together. However, not much love there. And so he spends a lot of time away. And once he meets Elphaba, he spends a lot of time in the Emerald City, and the two of them fall in love. And also, as I may or may not have mentioned in my previous video, in the book, Fiyero has body tattoos all over because that is part of his culture, and he is also described as having ochre skin. So the movie did not stay true to his looks as far as that's concerned. Also, in the movie, water does not hurt Elphaba, whereas in the book it does. So he stays true to the book Wizard of Oz canon, and Elphaba does not use water because it is painful, and even when she cries, it hurts. But yeah, so they are having a love affair, and eventually she tells him, you should leave town this next weekend. And she doesn't say why, but clearly something is going to happen with this resistance group, and so it would be dangerous for someone to be around, and so she's telling him he should get out of town. And he does not listen though, and instead he follows her, and he sees her attempt to kill Madame Morrible. However, it doesn't go as planned. And then he goes back to Elphaba's home and is hanging out there when guards show up and they break in. They see Fiyero there and they kill him. And then from here, Elphaba, she goes to a convent and then she sleeps for a year. And during that time, a baby appears who they name Lear. And so it seems pretty clear, the baby is the child of her and Fiyero. And so she does take him under her care. However, initially for a while, she doesn't acknowledge the connection between the two of them. And she also treats him pretty badly. As we'll get into later, there's a part where they're talking about where he sleeps, and he sleeps on the floor. And people are like, what? He doesn't have a bed? And she's like, what are you looking at me for? So she doesn't treat him very well in some ways, and she also doesn't treat him as her own child. Anyway, she lives in the convent for a while, and then eventually she decides to leave to go see Fiyero's wife, Samira, with the intent of coming clean about everything and hoping that Samira will forgive Elphaba. And so she takes Lear, and on her way to Samira, she adopts a snow monkey as well, a wolf joins her, and she also has some bees. Which again, the book, Wicked, it sticks true to the book, The Wizard of Oz, more so than the movie. And in the book, The Wizard of Oz, the witch has, bees and wolves and crows at her command. And also, I mentioned this in my previous video, but she adopts a snow monkey. She names him Chistry. And then later on, eventually she starts to breed snow monkeys. And then she herself performs surgeries on them to attach wings in an effort to create this new breed of winged snow monkey. And so in the book, she was fighting so hard for animal rights. But as the story goes on, she kind of loses track of that. Like once she enters the convent, that doesn't like fighting the system and trying to, protect the animal rights and things. That isn't what she's really focusing on. And she even is abusing the snow monkeys. But anyway, so she shows up to Samira's home and she tries to tell her about the affair and how she is at fault for Fiero's death. But Samira just doesn't want to hear it. And she just shuts her down and is like, shut up. I don't care. I don't want to hear this. But she does invite Elphaba to stay with them. And Samira lives with her sisters who don't have actual names. They're just referred to by their birth number. So we have, 6, 5, those are their names. And then she has 3 children, 2 boys and a daughter named Noor. And so Elphaba agrees that they will stay with her. And she vows, like, I'm going to befriend you though, and I'm going to get your forgiveness one way or the other. But then Samira's 2 boys, they are horrible to Lear and they bully him like crazy and they're so mean to him. And eventually over time, Lear goes missing and they find him at the bottom of the well and he is basically dead, but they are able to revive him. And Elphaba thinks Samira's sons are to blame because they're always doing horrible things like this. And so she causes one of the sons to die by making an icicle impale him through the head. However, when Lear wakes up enough, he tells them that he voluntarily went into the well. And while down there, he met a goldfish who told him that Fiero is his father, which makes Samira's children his half-siblings. And then, by the way, this book, we start before Elphaba is even born, and by the end, she's 38 years old. So years and years are passing in between events. But eventually some guards show up from the wizard, and long story short, they take Samira and her family away. And then also Nessa Rose dies because a house from another land crashed on top of her and killed her. And so Elphaba goes to Nessa's funeral where she is reunited with Glinda for the first time in a very long time. However, their reuniting goes sour because Elphaba gets upset when she learns that Glinda gave away Nessa's shoes to Dorothy. And Glinda had cast a spell on the shoes because in the book, Nessa has no arms. And so she has a hard time walking because she's so she's going to topple over. But Glinda casts a spell on the shoes to help her stand straight, and it works. And Nessa had told Elphaba that one day the shoes would be hers. And so now Elphaba is upset that Glinda gave away something that didn't even belong to her. Also, by the way, in the book, Nessa was very religious and she becomes leader of the Munchkin land. And she is a very cruel leader in part because she's super religious, but in a bad way. So her religious conviction makes her very mean. But yeah, so she dies. Her shoes are given to Dorothy. Elphaba is very upset. And then the guards show up yet again and they tell Elphaba that the wizard would like to see her father, who is still alive, although he is doing poorly. But if not the father, they want to see her because Nessa had been in charge of Munchkin Land, and now that she is dead, he needs to speak to the new person in line to take over to see, if they can be on the same page. And when she arrives, the wizard reveals his true self for the first time. And when Elphaba tells him, I'm just here to figure out what happened to Samira and her family, he tells her that all of them are dead except for Noor, the daughter. And Noor is in this horrible situation, and he is keeping her as a political prisoner, essentially, in order to protect himself against Elphaba, but also in order to try to manipulate her by using Noor's life against her. But when she finds out that Samira is dead, Elphaba, she isn't even sad, for Samira's sake. She's just dang it, now I can never be forgiven because now she's dead. But it's interesting because in that moment I talked earlier when Lear was found at the bottom of the well, she and Samira are talking about anger and the different anger that men and women feel. And Samira says this: a girl needs cold anger. They need the cold simmer, the ceaseless grudge, the talent to avoid forgiveness, the sidestepping of compromise. They need to know when they say something that they will never back down, ever, ever. Which came across to me like Samira sort of telling Elphaba that she's never gonna forgive her because she has this cold anger within her. But I guess Elphaba was in denial and hoped that one day she would be forgiven. But yeah, now that Samira is dead, Elphaba realizes that she can never get that forgiveness. But then as she is talking with the wizard, she tells him, like, by the way, we met years ago. I came to the Emerald City and you had appeared as like a, floating bones or whatever. And he did not even remember having met her. And so again, big change from book to movie because Elphaba is like some nobody essentially in the book. And so he's just like, oh, wow, like that's interesting. And they talk about Madame Morrible and the wizard is like, oh yeah, we've always been in cahoots and she always is cooking up something. And he says how Madame Morrible, is probably to blame for Fiero's death. And he also tells her that he wants the Grimoire, which he knows she has. The Grimoire being this magic book. And Elphaba tries to make use of it, but she has a hard time reading it. But the wizard tells her that it comes from his world and he therefore is able to read it. And the Grimoire is the whole reason why he ended up in Oz 40 years ago. And she tries to get the wizard to agree to leave if she gives him the Grimoire. But he is super non-committal and almost borderline apathetic. And he's like, I can't be held to a verbal agreement. And so he's not going to agree to anything. But from here, Elphaba, she leaves Emerald City and she comes across Bach living in Munchkinland. And he is married to some other woman and they have kids and they reconnect and it stirs up old memories. And then she decides, like, you know what? I'm going to go to Shiz and I am going to murder Madame Morrible for what she has done. And so she goes to Shiz, but once she arrives in Madame Morrible's chambers, she is already dead. She died of natural causes, apparently. But Elphaba, not wanting to be robbed of her vengeance, she still bashes in Madame Morrible's skull. And then she's like, you know what? I want to make sure people think I killed Madame Morrible. And so she goes to this other old friend from Shiz and she tells him, like, I just murdered Madame Morrible. But the friend is super chill about it and kind of doesn't care. And he has Elphaba stay for dinner. And then from there, Elphaba continues on her way. And she soon meets a dwarf who is with the clock of the time dragon. And this is a clock, but it's also a mechanism that puts on plays and stories. And so she is talking to the dwarf, and this related to the conversation she had with the guy earlier, but she's talking to the dwarf about this hag named Yackle, who has been present at key moments even before Elphaba's life, but she has just kind of been there throughout the story. But then basically the dwarf says to her, there are things I don't know and things I do, said the dwarf, who Yackle answers to, if anyone, if anything, is beyond my realm of knowledge or interest. But why you must know this. For you, the dwarf spoke in a bright offhand tone, are neither this nor that, or shall I say both this and that, both of Oz and of the other world. Your old Frex, her father, always was wrong. You were never a punishment for his crimes. You are a half-breed. You are a new breed. You are a grafted limb. You are a dangerous anomaly. Always you were drawn to the composite creatures, the broken and reassembled, for that is what you are. Can you be so dull that you have not figured this out? And he then puts on a show on the clock of the time dragon, which reveals Elphaba's history and the fact that she is the daughter of the wizard. Because her mom, when her dad was out of town, this traveling salesman showed up. He got Elphaba's mom drunk on this green elixir. They'd had sex, and then that is how Elphaba was conceived. So it turns out that traveling salesman had been the wizard. And then from here, she goes back to Samira's home, which has also been her home for years now. And she says of it, she was 38 and just realizing what it felt like to have a sense of home. For that, Samira, thank you, she thought. Maybe the definition of home is a place where you are never forgiven, so you may always belong there, bound by guilt. And maybe the cost of belonging is worth it. And she now is living there with just Nanny, who raised her, who is very old now, and her son, Lear. And Lear tells her, like, hey, Dorothy and her gang are coming here to murder you. And the reason the wizard gives, like, to the public as to why Elphaba needs to die is because she murdered Madame Morrible. So that is what he is saying. And so that is why he is like, we need to get Dorothy to kill her because she's a murderer. And so even though she is called the Wicked Witch, she wasn't this huge known enemy, right? The wizard hadn't even remembered meeting her. So again, very different from the movie. And at this point, Elphaba is also, she's been drinking a lot too, and she's like losing touch with reality. And she's starting to think like, yeah, like I did murder Madame Morrible. And so her belief of what's real and what's not and what actually happened is getting a little fuzzy. But at one point, Lear asks her if she could have any wish come true, what would it be? And she says that she would want a soul. And her answer surprises her because she has never believed in the idea of a soul. And when she asks Lear what his wish would be, he says it would be to have a father. And so Elphaba, again, she isn't all there, and she's starting to think about the group with Dorothy. And she remembers the lion from her class at Shiz, but she's like, he shouldn't take issue with me because she had no part in what happened to him. Because in the book, she was not one of the ones who took the lion out of the class. And so she's like, he shouldn't have a problem with me. And then she's thinking of the Tin Man, and she's like, that's probably someone Nessa must have caused to turn into tin by cursing his axe. And by the way, this is how he became a Tin Man in the original book, is a witch cursed his axe and caused him to chop off his body parts until he became all tin. And so again, she's like, yeah, like, so that explains who that guy is. But then she's like, but who's the Scarecrow? What's his story? And then we read, but she had no way to place the Scarecrow. She began to think that behind that painted cornmeal sack of a face, there was a face she would know, a face that she had been waiting for. She lit a candle and said the words aloud, as if she really could do spells. The words blew aside the taper of grayish smoke that rose from the fatty tallow. If they had any other effect in the world than that, she didn't know it yet. Fiyero didn't die, she said. He was imprisoned, and he has escaped. He is coming home to Kiamo Ko. He is coming home to me, and he is disguised as a scarecrow because he doesn't know yet what he will find. It would take brains to think up such a plan. And so she is thinking that they will be reunited and that Lear will get his wish of a father. And also, if Fiyero is alive, then it means she doesn't have a need to be forgiven because she needs to be forgiven in large part for causing his death, right? It's not the affair so much. And so, yeah, her idea that Fiyero will return will also absolve her of this guilt she feels. But she later has wolves, bees, and crows go attack Dorothy and her group, and she tells them to take off the mask of the Scarecrow to see who is beneath the disguise, only to learn that he really is just a scarecrow. And so she stops thinking that he is Fiyero. Also, at one point earlier, she was thinking how Dorothy reminded her of herself when she was young, and she thinks about how her father had wanted forgiveness for, in part, causing the death of Turtleheart, this guy who had showed up, and he is potentially the father of Nessa Rose. But both parents, Elphaba's father and mother, had both been in love with Turtleheart. And in the book we read, Elphaba the girl does not know how to see her father as a broken man. All she knows is that he passes his brokenness on to her. Daily his habits of loathing and self-loathing cripple her. Daily she loves him back because she knows no other way. I see myself there, the girl witnessed, wide-eyed as Dorothy, staring at a world too horrible to comprehend, believing, by dint of ignorance and innocence, that beneath this unbreakable contract of guilt and blame, there is always an older contract that may bind and release in a more salutary way, a more ancient precedent of ransom, that we may not always be tormented by our shame. Neither Dorothy nor young Elphaba can speak of this, but the belief of it is in both our faces. And so again, this theme of forgiveness comes up a lot. And so her father wanting forgiveness, and now she wants forgiveness, and she sees this in Dorothy too, who we find out pretty soon also wanted forgiveness. But anyway, she gets the monkeys to bring Dorothy to the castle, to where she lives. And Lear is very excited about having Dorothy there, and they sit down to a meal together. But eventually the witch takes Dorothy aside, and she's telling her how she wants her shoes. But Dorothy is like, I can't take them off. I think Glinda did something because they're stuck to my feet. I wish I could take them off because my socks are so sweaty, but she can't. And she says how when the wizard told me to come here to kill you, I have no intention of killing you. I feel horrible about having killed your sister. So no, I don't want to kill you. But the reason I came here is because I wanted to talk to you. And we read, I would say, said the girl, straightening up, gritting her teeth, I would say to you, would you ever forgive me for that accident, for the death of your sister? Would you ever forgive me, for I could never forgive myself? The witch shrieked in panic and disbelief that even now the world should twist so, offending her once again. Elphaba, who had endured Samira's refusal to forgive, now begged by a gibbering child for the same mercy always denied her. How could you give such a thing out of your own hollowness? She was caught twisting, trying, full of will, but toward what? A fragment of the brush of the broom fluttered off, and it lit on her skirt, and there was a run of flames in her lap, eating up the driest tinder in the Vincus. Oh, will this nightmare never end? Screamed Dorothy, and she grabbed at a bucket for collecting rainwater that, in a sudden flare-up of light, had come into view. She said, "I will save you," and she hurled the water at the witch. So Dorothy does end up killing her, but it was a mistake. And the wizard is later brought the remnants of the broom as well as a green glass bottle. And when he sees it, he realizes that he had been Elphaba's dad. And from here, he decides to leave of his own accord in the air balloon he arrived in. And then the book ends with them saying how different rumors were spread on what happens to Dorothy and no one knows for sure. And then also Lear, who is still alive, he goes to the Emerald City because he knows Nor is alive and he knows that she had been prisoner. And so he goes there to try to save her, who is his half-sister. And that's how it ends. So there's a lot still left going on, and things in Oz, the Emerald City, aren't getting any better. And, Glinda has been complicit in what is happening. And so this is a series. So if you want to know what happens with Lear and Nor and the Emerald City and Oz, then you can read the other books. I personally, even though I liked it better this time around, I have no interest in reading the series as a whole. But yeah, that's how this particular book ends. And so, like I said, the book philosophizes a lot on what makes a person wicked or evil and about the existence of God and the soul and about forgiveness, of course. And so it can be interesting at times, but it's kind of long for my taste. And some of the things I thought were interesting, some of them not so much. And then again, it's also just so much to take in. Like what I just told you is a very bare bones version of the second half, and it's just so much. And there's a lot I left out, to be honest. But to move on to the movie plot now. So the movie starts sometime after the first one has ended, and Nessa is in a relationship with Bach still. Glinda is working alongside Morrible and the wizard and is engaged to Fiyero. Although she and the wizard thought they should get engaged, it wasn't Fiero's idea because he is still in love with Elphaba. But he is now in charge of the guard who is trying to find Elphaba, who is, the enemy of the state, as she tries to reveal the truth about the wizard being a fraud and trying to help protect the talking animals. But Glinda and Fiyero, they know the truth about Elphaba, despite what the wizard and Morrible, they're spreading all sorts of lies about her. But Glinda knows the truth, and on the day of her wedding to Fiyero, Elphaba shows up, and she and the wizard try to get Elphaba to join forces with them. And the wizard also says how, even now, if I revealed that I was a fraud, the people would never believe it because they want to believe I'm the wonderful Wizard of Oz, and we can't undo that. And so he's like, the best option is for you to just join forces with us. And so she tells him, okay, I'll do it, but on the condition that you free the winged monkeys. Again, she accidentally gave them wings because she was tricked by the wizard, which is very different from the book. But she's like, free the winged monkeys and then stop harassing animals and let any animals who have left the city in order to find safety, allow them back in with no repercussions and let it be a safe world for the animals, and we have an agreement. And the wizard does agree to this. And so Glinda is like, sweet, yay, everything will be perfect. And she goes off to get married. However, Elphaba then, Chistry, the lead monkey, he shows Elphaba a room full of animals in cages, including Professor Dillamond. And so despite the wizard following through and letting the winged monkeys out, he clearly is not going to follow through on his promise about the animals. And he tells Elphaba, hey, some animals can't be trusted. We gotta keep some of them in cages. And so Elphaba, realizing that the wizard will just always be corrupt and evil, she's like, never mind, our deal is off and I'm gonna fight you till my dying day. And she releases all of the animals, which then wreak havoc on the wedding before it can be completed. And so then Fiyero shows up, and he is there with the wizard and Elphaba, but he sides with Elphaba. And then when Glinda shows up, she sees that Fiyero wants to leave with Elphaba and that the two of them are in love, and she is heartbroken because she truly had loved Fiyero. And then from here, once they leave, Morrible and the wizard, they're like, we gotta get her back and get rid of her. What can we do? How can we, lure her to us? And Glinda, again, who is heartbroken, she's like, use her sister. Spread a rumor that her sister is in danger and she will show up. And then from there, you can take her prisoner. And then she leaves. And once Glinda is gone, Morrible and the wizard, they're like, that's a good idea. But Elphaba's way too smart to believe a lie, so we can't just start a rumor. We have to actually do something to Nessa Rose. And so Madame Morrible, she is only able to do magic with the weather. And so she causes a storm to happen, which brings in Dorothy and her house, and it crashes onto Nessa Rose, who had been outside looking for Bach. I'll get to Bach in a minute. But yeah, the house lands on her and kills her. And when this happens, Elphaba had been getting all cozy with Fiyero when suddenly she's like, something's wrong. It's my sister. I have to go. And she tells him to stay put, I think. But she also keeps being like, is this going to last? Are you going to stay here? Are you going to go? What's happening? Like, is this just one night only? But he acts like, I'm here for good, baby. I love you. But then once she leaves, he also ends up leaving with the flying monkeys, like they have a moment in the forest. But basically, Elphaba then shows up right after Dorothy has left. And so everyone is gone, and she sees the house and Nessa's body, and she sees Glinda there. She finds out that Glinda gave away the shoes to Dorothy, and then they get upset and they start arguing and fighting with each other, when then the guards show up and they arrest Elphaba. And then from here, Fiyero shows up. He threatens to kill Glinda if they do not let Elphaba go. And so the guards let go of Elphaba, she flies off, but then the guards arrest Fiyero, and so they're threatening, like, we're gonna go put him up on the pole out in the field. And so Elphaba, in desperation not for him to die, casts a spell for him not to be hurt, but also she's reading from the Grimoire, and she acknowledges that she doesn't know the power of the Grimoire and doesn't even know what the spell is exactly she is casting. But basically, the spell causes him to turn into the Scarecrow, and so because he is made of straw, he therefore can't be hurt. And Bach, by the way, he wanted to leave Nessa, and in revenge, she was cruel to the animals and going with the wizard and his mean laws. And her reason is like, if I stand up for animals, people are just going to say I'm just like my sister and everybody hates my sister. So I need to show that we are not the same. And so once Bach breaks her heart, she also starts being very cruel to the Munchkins. And so he can no longer leave because Munchkins aren't allowed to leave unless they get written permission. And she's not going to give him written permission. And so he comes back to work for her, which kind of confused me. Like, sure, you can't leave Munchkin land, but why would you go back and work for her? I guess he was hoping to sway her into letting him leave. Also, when he breaks up with her, he's leaving. You know, she's sad, and so she tells him, like, get out of here. And as he's leaving, he's like, you know, you will see me again. Like, why would you say that to someone you just broke up with? Like, I don't want to see you again. You just broke up with me. Get out of here. So I don't know why he said that. But anyway, so he is now working for her. When Elphaba shows up, and Elphaba has the Grimoire, and she casts a spell because Nessa is thinking about the past when things were better. And she's like, that night, I felt like I was floating when Bach was dancing with me and everything was so perfect and the world had so much potential. And so as a way to literally lift Nessa's spirits, Elphaba casts a spell from the Grimoire that causes her to float, and it does make Nessa feel better. And then Bach comes in, and he sees that Glinda is getting married, and so he comes in to tell Nessa, please let me go to the Emerald City. I need to tell Glinda how I feel about her before she gets married. And of course, Nessa was already heartbroken, and hearing that she can never get him back because he's in love with Glinda, it makes her even more upset. And so she's like, I need to find a way to capture your heart and make your heart be mine, essentially. And so she starts reading from the Grimoire, but she has no idea what she's doing. She's mispronouncing the words, and it is causing Bach's heart to shrink. So he's gonna die. And so she's freaking out, and she's telling Elphaba, like, do something to save him. And so then Elphaba casts a spell in order to make him, and a spell from the Grimoire can't be undone. So the only way is to find a workaround. And so she has to find a way to make him be someone who can live without a heart. And so he is then turned into the Tin Man. And when he awakens, he had kind of forgotten what happened. And Nessa tells him, like, Elphaba did this to you. I'm so sorry. It wasn't me. It was Elphaba. And so now he is upset at Elphaba, thinking she did this to him for no reason. But anyway, Dorothy, she shows up to the wizard with her group that she is with. Fiyero, who is now a scarecrow, the cowardly lion from earlier, who for some reason dislikes Elphaba and dislikes that she took him away from his cage. And he is voiced by Coleman Domingo, but he only has like one line, so it seemed silly that he even got a character poster. But anyway. as well as the Tin Man, who is upset at Elphaba for what she has done to him. So they show up to see the wizard in order to make things right. And the wizard doesn't want to see them, but Morrible tells him like, hey, you should see them and let's use this to our advantage. So tell Dorothy to go kill Elphaba. And so that is what the wizard does. But Glinda, she is realizing that she has become something she hates and she's just so unhappy and her whole life is a lie. And she thought Nessa's death was an accident, but she confronts Morrible and learns that Nessa's death was intentional. And so she's like, this isn't what I want to be part of. So she runs off to Elphaba and tries to warn her, like, hey, they're coming to kill you. Save yourself. But Elphaba seems to just accept that she's gonna die potentially. And so she and Glinda have like a tearful moment and they sing a song together. And she tells Glinda, once I'm gone, you need to continue the narrative that I was wicked, and then you can be good and you can actually enact positive change in the world. And from here, she has Glinda hide in a closet, and Glinda then sees, like through the crack, she sees Dorothy show up, throw water on Elphaba, who then shrieks and, melts away and dies. And when Glinda walks out of the closet, we see Elphaba's hat, and with it is a green bottle. And she was told by Elphaba, like, oh, this green bottle is all I have left of my mother. And Glinda recognizes this because the wizard has been drinking a lot lately. And so she takes this green bottle to the wizard and she shows it to him, and they both realize that he was her father. So he caused the death of his own daughter. And her being half of both worlds is also why she is so powerful. But Glinda tells him, like, get the heck out of town. Look at what you've done. And he agrees to this. She then puts Madame Morrible in jail and she rights the wrongs that have been done in Oz, and the animals all come back and everything's all good. And in the end, she also starts to be able to access the Grimoire and do magic. And so all along, she wanted to be able to cast spells and work with her wand and do magic, but it was all a lie. It was all a fake because she couldn't actually do it. But here in the end, we see she is starting to gain that ability. Meanwhile, Fiyero, who is the Scarecrow, he shows up to where Elphaba had died, and Glinda fully believed Elphaba's dead, by the way. But the Scarecrow, Fiyero, shows up, and he knocks on a secret passageway underground, and he opens it up, and Elphaba had been in there. Because remember, water doesn't actually hurt her. And in the movie, the citizens of Oz start spreading that rumor, like, oh, I heard water will melt her. And so Fiyero knows that this is a lie, and yet he encourages it because he's like, water won't hurt her, so go ahead and let them believe this. And so she didn't actually die from this because water doesn't hurt her. He lets her out. She sees him as the Scarecrow for the first time, which I was a little confused by because this ending makes it seem like they planned this. But apparently they didn't plan this together. But again, he knows water doesn't hurt her. So I guess he just assumed, obviously, she is still alive and she must be hiding underground because that makes the most sense. So I guess he was just hoping she was under there. Anyway, they see each other for the first time again. And they're like, I love you, I want to be with you. And they leave Oz together into a mysterious world to live happily ever after. And so while I do love on one hand how the movie has the three with Dorothy be people from Elphaba's life, I think that's so cool. And while it doesn't always totally align with the actual movie The Wizard of Oz, that's okay because, this isn't a direct prequel, it's a spin-off, so it's connected, but not officially. So it's fine if it doesn't totally line up. Because stuff with the Scarecrow, it's like, why would he be saying the things he's saying in The Wizard of Oz if he's actually Fiyero? It doesn't really make sense. But anyway, it doesn't need to. I don't really care about nitpicking between whether or not it perfectly aligns. But I did think it's funny that in the movie, Dorothy, she tells the Scarecrow, you're my favorite one of all and I'll miss you the most. But it makes sense in some ways because if the Scarecrow is Fiyero, in the first movie, Fiyero, he wins over everybody. They're all head over heels over him. And so it almost fits his personality that, of course, Dorothy would also be won over by his personality, despite being a Scarecrow. So that part actually is kind of funny to think about. And while I said I'm not going to nitpick about whether or not this aligns with The Wizard of Oz, I do think just in the context of Wicked, why would Fiyero go with Dorothy to see the wizard? He knows the wizard can do nothing, but even if he wants to tell Dorothy to go there regardless, like why would he go with her? Wouldn't he just go straight to Elphaba? I mean, I'm sure there's some way you could spin this to make sense, but the more I've thought about it, again, on one hand, I think it's cool that they make these people characters from Elphaba's life. At the same time, it almost is like they're trying to shoehorn this in. And so I kind of prefer the book where it's like, yeah, they're, some of them might be people she sort of kind of knows, but not really. And so I prefer that in some ways. And so, yeah, I guess I have mixed feelings on it. I think it's a cool idea. I just don't know if the musical executed it well enough and made it make sense enough at the end of the day. But yeah. And then the scene with Glinda watching Elphaba die through the crack and Elphaba telling her, go in here and hide and don't stop them, let it happen. It was reminding me of the line, The Witch in the Wardrobe, when Lucy and Susan, Aslan tells them to just hide and stay put, don't stop anything. And so they witness Aslan's death. It's like there needed to be a witness, right, in both. And then also the person, Aslan/Elphaba, they end up coming back in one way or another. And so both sacrifice themselves in order to achieve a greater good in the world. But I do think with this movie, I wish Glinda had been in on it. Because she is so heartbroken that Fiyero loves Elphaba. And she's also so hurt that Elphaba, would steal her man. And so Glinda has a great character arc, but how even more satisfying would it be in some ways if Glinda showed up to see Elphaba and she tells her hey, they're coming to kill you. But I have an idea. Let's fake your death, and then you and Fiyero can be together in the end. For her to go from being so angry and hurt and jealous to then helping them be together because she loves both of them and she wants what's best for both of them. And so I think it just would have been really cool for her to be in on it. And yet that's not the case. She truly thinks Elphaba has died, I guess. Maybe in her heart, she thinks Elphaba's still out there. But I read up on the musical, and apparently the musical is the same in the movie, where Glinda had not been in on it. But yeah, I wanted her to be part of it. Or also, clearly the three of you all have a love for each other. Just become a throuple and you can all just three go off and be happy all together. But then Oz wouldn't have a leader, so someone had to stay behind. Also, he turns into the Scarecrow, and so I'm like, man, good thing they had sex before that happened, because now he's just made of straw. So at least they'll always have that one night to remember. But yeah, this movie, like I said, really focuses on Glinda, which is a huge difference from the book, which the book is all about Elphaba. And in the second half, Glinda barely shows up. She's there at Nessa's funeral. And then the last time we see her, she and Elphaba cross paths in the street, and she calls out to Elphaba, but Elphaba is angry and wants nothing to do with her, so she just keeps walking. And also, like I said, Oz isn't doing better in the end of the book. Glinda had been complicit with what the wizard was doing, and she's not making any big changes in the end. But also the book, like I said, there's more books in the series, so I haven't read them, so I know nothing about what Glinda does going forward. If you want to comment, if you have read the books, go ahead and let us know. But also in the book, Madame Morrible, in the first half, she had got Nessa, Elphaba, and Glinda together, and she put them in a trance, and she put a spell on them, saying how they would all be leaders in these various parts of the country and telling them what they would do, basically. But then part of the spell involves them not remembering this happening. And so Elphaba remembers, and I guess the spell doesn't work on her, but Glinda and Nessa Rose, did the spell truly work on them? And they have no memory of it, but turns out their actions are not their own, and it's them being under this spell by Madame Morrible? Is that why Glinda isn't a good person? Is because Morrible had put a spell on her? Let me know down in the comments. Maybe that's clarified and I just missed it, but let me know. But then also in the book, Glinda can do some small magic. Like I said, she put a spell on Nessa's shoes to help her. But her inability to do magic is a huge part of the movie. And we also see her childhood self, right? And so basically her entire life, she's wanted this so bad, and yet she's always just had to lie about it. And that's also why she makes herself so likable and pleasant and popular, as a way to distract from the fact that she actually has no powers. And so, yeah, this was definitely, I had no idea Glinda would be the main star in the second half, so I was surprised by that. But when it comes to book versus movie, so yeah, like I said, in preparation for this video, I went through the book again, the second half, and I was really liking it. And I almost want to say I prefer the ending of the book over the ending of the movie, although it's also so hard to compare because they are so totally different. But it's funny because as far as the first half goes, Wicked the movie was so much better than the first half of the book, and yet as far as the second half goes, it's a tougher call because I guess I still prefer the movie overall. But yeah, I was liking how things ended up in the book and where things go. And I don't know what's changed within myself for me to like the book more than I did a year ago. But yeah, I was into it and I was liking how it all wrapped up. And again, I like how they were able to stay true to the book, The Wizard of Oz. But I do like the movie ending too. And I like that they live happily ever after. And I like that Elphaba doesn't truly die and she gets to be with Fiyero. Again, my only critique maybe is that I wish Glinda had been in on it. And then also, like I said, I kind of wish they explained things more with Fiyero. Like, how did he know she was under there? And obviously they had never seen each other before, and so I feel like that didn't quite make sense. Like, they should have already seen each other and planned this out. He was acting like he knew without a doubt she was in that hatch thing, but like, how did he know that? I don't know. And also in the beginning too, like Nessa Rose is suddenly governor and Glinda is suddenly like this important figure. And I guess in some ways I wish the movie was longer actually, because they could further expand on some of these things. But regardless, I still loved this movie. I'm seeing it again on Saturday. I'm going with my sister, so I am excited to see it again. I'm also curious what I will think about it the second time around, and maybe it's not that I disliked it, but I definitely like part one more. And so I'm curious to see it a second time and maybe more fully decide how I feel about part two. But yeah. Anyway, I like the ending of both book and movie, even though they are total opposites. Although if you were to twist my arm and force me to pick which one I preferred, I would say all in all, I like how the book wraps things up much better than the movie did. And yet the book, like I said, when I read it all the way through last year, it just felt like it went on so long and I couldn't wait for it to be done, if I'm being honest. Whereas the movie, all in all, it's a more enjoyable experience. And again, I'm not saying it's more enjoyable because it's more lighthearted. I'm saying I just preferred the movie experience all in all, even though I prefer how the book ends. Anyway, thank you for watching my video. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Share your thoughts down below. What is your favorite song from Wicked, by the way? Like I said, I preferred the songs in part one. Also, the dance choreography was so fantastic in part one, and I feel like we didn't get any impressive choreography here, which disappointed me. Also, Fiyero, he has his duet with Elphaba, which I liked, but yeah, his song Dancing Through Life in part one is just such a fantastic scene. And so I guess I was wanting more from him in some ways. And then the way he looks as the Scarecrow, it was fine, but I wasn't loving it, if I'm being honest. But yeah, anyway, let me know your thoughts. And thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Bye.